Hello, welcome to the live stream. So this is a bit of an impromptu one today. Matt and I were talking last week and we decided we will get together to talk about some of the new projects at KubeCon. And also there's been some open source blog posts and articles posted recently all about funding. And I thought we could have a look at them together once we had an introduction from Matt. Now he's joined us and I'm going to bring him onto the stage and we'll see. Hopefully all of our AV is working. So let's bring you on.
Hello. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Yeah, it's working excellent.
All right, perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Farina. I'm an engineer over at SUSE. I came in through the Rancher acquisition, although Rancher is sort of new to me, being there less than a year, I think 7-8 months now. And I'm working on open source projects over at SUSE. Lots and lots of neat new stuff coming out of there.
So I was pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, you were at Azure for a really long time. Before
No. That's Matt Butcher. So there's, if you think about Helm, there's 3 Matts on it. There's Matt Butcher, who created Helm. There is Matt Fisher, who came in very early on. In fact, he was one of the guys who worked on Deus workflow back in the day. Then there's myself, and I've worked with them for quite a long time. I worked with Matt Butcher at 2 different companies, a company called Palantir.net, not the Palantir everybody knows out of California, but a smaller consulting shop out of Chicago, and HP. He and I worked together at HP for a while, and we've worked on other stuff together over time.
Okay.
And so the 3 of us Matts have known each other for a long time.
So it's understandable to get confused. So glad that you've set that straight for everyone. So where were you before you came into Rancher and then into SUSE?
So I was at Samsung, and I was working on cloud and IT stuff over there. Samsung SDS does IT across the Samsung group, and most folks don't know how big and crazy Samsung is. It's like 20% of the GDP of South Korea, but they're a global company.
Wow.
And like they're the number 2 largest heavy shipbuilder in the world. So when you think of like ocean liners and tankers, they're the number 2 biggest. Like when I went to South Korea, there were TV commercials to get your renter's insurance through Samsung, right? They're into everything.
It must have felt bizarre in the hotel room. Were you there for orientation or something? And
I was there for a conference. There was a CNCF conference. They were doing, I think, the Kubernetes days. They did them in India. One of them they did was in South Korea, and I went over there for that. But yeah, it was different. But SDS, where I worked, did IT across the company as a whole, across all these different divisions. And so we did Kubernetes and cloud native technologies for Samsung stuff, everywhere from, I don't even know the places because they use technology for washers and dryers, in chip fabrication, operating a global public store. There's IT across all this.
Yeah. Well, look, it looks like we have a few guests already. We've got Alistair, who works on Arcade and contributes to that. Have you met Alistair, or have you used Arcade before?
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. We've got to change that. One of the projects that we're going to talk about today is Kim, Kubernetes and Image Manager, right?
Yep.
And I was just fiddling around on my keyboard and I wrote a unit test to add Kim to Arcade. So you can just download it, whatever kind of architecture or OS or what's the third one? Well, the third one that you're on, it will figure out the right string to download the correct binary, bring it down, and then you can just use it.
That's great. That's great. I guess I hadn't realized Kim didn't have that, but we've been using it in Rancher Desktop. And so we do something like that to pull it in with what's bundled.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, Alistair was saying to me recently how he'd rebuilt his desktop and needed about 20 different CLIs. So rather than waiting for Brew or getting something outdated out of apt, he used Arcade, and that knows how to sort of just poke the correct binary in the correct place.
That's good. That's good.
Cool. Okay. And we have Utsav as well, the regular contributor to OpenFAS and helped out a bit with inlets. Now, I don't know if you can see it, but in the viewer, and if I go like that, no, that's worse. Which way do I need to go? I have my ketchup top on. Now, obviously, K3S is a big deal at Rancher at the moment. What did you make of last week's coverage? You know, it seemed to be popping up in Twitter left, right, and center.
Well, last week, I actually didn't get much time to pay attention to Twitter. So I guess that's a really good thing. And Rancher Desktop, one of the projects that I'm working on, uses K3S as its engine. And so I'm really happy with it because it's a little bit more performant. It runs really well on the desktop. And that's really where you want a slim distribution. So I'm glad to see it in more uses out there, from edge to desktop or wherever. Kubernetes comes with a little bit of overhead. And if you're working on apps or you're running on the edge, you really just want something as lightweight as possible, because it's a little bit different than the data center where you can throw another machine at it. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yes, I am. Absolutely. So this is the K3S website. I wasn't so keen on the new logo. Were you around with the old logo?
I don't remember that. No, I remember the old logo vaguely.
Yeah, I can't even exactly remember it now, but I just remember this one popping out. Looks a little bit nuclear, I'd say.
I hadn't thought of it.
K3S is certainly something that I've done a lot of work with as well, and recently helped the CNCF and then Linux Foundation to launch a new course. This is one of the things that was in my sponsors update that I also sent over to you. It was quite a long one this week because there's just so much that happened. Yeah. But it's all about K3S and the edge. You put a link into the chat for this. And so it was quite cool. The Linux Foundation and CNCF came to me and said, could you help us write a course about edge? And, you can do it on K3S, maybe mention a little bit about Raspberry Pi as well, and look at the broader landscapes. I don't know if you're familiar with projects like Balena OS and the LF Edge, Azure Acri. Obviously, the other Matt would know that one a little bit better as well.
Yeah, I know LF Edge, and I've heard of the Azure one, but I haven't. There's so many, right? If you go to just look at the CNCF ecosystem now, there's the dashboard that Dan had helped get created that lists all the little logos. And now they're so tiny, you can't make out the logos on them anymore because there's just so many things.
You know what would have potentially been really cool is if Kim had been available when I was writing the course, because you can see we effectively would want to get K3S, and the easiest way I could get it for everybody, no matter what kind of computer you're on, was K3D, because the common denominator there is Docker, right? So whether I'm on a Linux desktop, a Mac, or even an ARM64, providing the image is there, which it is, I can just get a cluster. And then
when I first started using K3S, I started using K3D. That was my first way to get it going. I'm like, what's the easiest way to get it going? Oh, K3D. That's easy. I already have Docker installed here. I'll just use K3D.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was sort of torn because there's so many different ways of getting a local Kubernetes and even a local K3S. And we really like multipass. That's kind of similar to what you're doing with Rancher Desktop, actually, and a bit lower level. And then you can use Ketchup to install into that. Have you tried Ketchup yet? I know that. Now, what is his name? The developer relations manager at Ranch, I think he's transitioning into a new role.
Are you thinking Adrian?
Adrian, yeah.
Yeah.
He's a big fan and has mentioned it quite a bit, which is nice.
No, I'll admit I haven't used Ketchup. There's just so many things out there now.
Oh, you're missing out. Yeah.
I am.
What do you think, Alistair and Sam? Do we need to get Tim, so Matt, aware about Arcade and Ketchup? Tell us in the comments. And we've got Lucas as well. Now, Lucas is also an OpenFAS core contributor. So I've actually got two of the core team there, which is pretty nice.
That's great.
And he was the one that put me onto Kim, actually. And he said, I think it just could be so cool to use something like this, and maybe we can build our OpenVAS Docker containers directly into the cluster without building locally, pushing and pulling back again. And if you're using GitHub Container Registry, the first push you have to go and click and make it public, right? Unless you set up an image pull secret. And so pretty excited to have a demo with Kim. But first of all, I thought we could also just look at a couple of these tweets. So one of them, well, let's say blog posts. The first one was, and I noticed that you liked or commented on one of these, but the first one was this one. Is this one of the ones that you saw? Perhaps it was the Babel. So basically,
I've seen this one. So the Random Guide in Nebraska. Which project is this?
I'm not sure, but we could probably dig into that. Effectively, what it's saying is much of the open source world is critically underfunded and yet critically important. Now, I guess I've had some pretty frank discussions with Darren, Shepard, and Shang, the C-suite from before. Obviously, they have their new roles at SUSE, but they were very, very open and very frank, and I hope they don't mind me saying, but they said if one of our open source projects isn't doing well, we'll kill it, and that's it. We're running a business, and we're only interested in projects that have traction and that benefit our business, and so we're very happy to kill something. And I was quite surprised because we've got the OpenVAS contributors here. Just to think one day OpenVAS isn't doing well financially, just going to kill it, could have a huge impact to a lot of people. And yet I think this is one of the things that we just sort of put our heads in the sand and carry on, is that there's some potentially very big companies using the tools we're building. We don't always know they're around. And if something does happen, a show-stopping bug, for instance, they don't really have a good way of getting that fixed most of the time.
Yeah, no, and I see where you're going. I think this project might actually be NTP, because there was some stories about it maybe a year ago where there was one person who was handling most of NTP, which is how we all get time on all of our digital electronics, right? Everything that plugs in, it gets time. You're dealing with NTP under the hood, from computers to smart clocks to, all this stuff, right? Phones, it's all NTP based. And I think there was one guy doing it, and he wasn't funded for the work. He was just doing it in his spare time. I mean, think about that. This is like critical infrastructure for companies like, Microsoft with Windows and Apple with all their devices. And yet you've got one guy doing it as open source somewhere and being underfunded. And I think the other article you had was from Babel. And that's one that I saw. And it's those are almost different in the way that I see them, right? So NTP is a core piece of infrastructure that all these major companies that are billion and trillion dollar companies rely upon for rudimentary functionality to work, right? And it's just ingrained in what they do. But on the other hand, you take something like Babel. Babel doesn't produce any user-facing features for somebody, right? Nobody on Windows or Mac or on their smartwatch is all of a sudden going to have something stop working because of Babel. And yet what is often people who work at companies contributing to something upstream, they've got full-time people, or they've tried to have full-time people just work on it to build out those features. And so there's some differences there. Oh, was it
OpenSSL is really the one that comes to mind as well. I mean, equally as important as NTP these days is, they were earning less than $2,000 per year in donations, not per month. And the Heartbleed vulnerability, I think, really sort of shook the pillars. But they're saying now they've got 2 supporters pushing 5K, and I don't know if that's per month or per year. I wouldn't be surprised if it was per year. And so I often have people say to me like, "Oh, Alex, I'd sponsor you on GitHub, but I don't use your stuff." And I say, "Well, have you ever Googled anything about Docker? And when you did, and you saw my blog post and it saved you 5 hours, you are using my stuff." That is what the GitHub sponsors is about. It's so that I've got time to go and write technical content, learn things, have the privilege and joy to go and learn stuff and explain it and help people understand it. I mean, my blog has hundreds of thousands of hits per year. Not to mention, let's say, the work that I'm doing as a CNCF ambassador and many others are doing. So it is difficult, like you say, with Babel. People don't necessarily see it. OpenSSL, it's not necessarily in your face. There might be things I've created that people don't realize that they're benefiting from as well. And so I do appreciate people pitching in. But yeah, he says here, just pull it up again, that there was a survey, and let's grab it up again. Here we go. Andre Stoltz collected data from Open Collective and GitHub to assess revenues. Over 50% of projects couldn't sustain their maintainers above the poverty line. I mean, that's effectively where I was with Patreon. You know, that was the first platform that I tried for OpenVAS, and it was like $300 a month was a high point on that platform. And I remember thinking you get more than that at McDonald's turning burgers over. And then 31% generated enough salary that was considered basically unacceptable. So maybe you're, I don't know, hitting low 5 digits. Now, I was having a chat with one of the OpenVAS contributors this morning about this blog post. Actually, you know, I can make a decent amount of money from my experience in the industry, but not doing open source. It's doing consulting. And that is actually like the course that you saw. Linux Foundation was one of my company's clients. Civo has been, and Equinix Metal, previously known as Packet, have all been clients that will pay for the experience and branding and knowledge and sort of second sense that you get doing the kind of work we do. But every hour or every project I do like that, you're not getting anything into OpenVAS or anything else. So really, I would love to be able to get to the point where, you know, I could work on it comfortably full time. We could start bringing other people in, and that's where the Babel post was. I think Henry seemed to be either the first person that started working on this, or maybe he was just the first person that they started paying. And they started with a pretty. I don't know, what do you think? How does this compare for you? Like $11,000 a month, it's a base salary. Do you think
that's a good question? Well, $11,000 a month is what, $130-some thousand a year.
Probably,
and, yeah. So that's $130-some thousand a year. But when you figure that's base salary, I don't know what they're doing for benefits. Right, in the United States,
no benefits.
No benefits. Yeah, and if you've got a family, the benefits are going to run you in the United States like 20-some thousand a year for some of the healthcare and insurances. It doesn't kick in on retirement. And so when you think about some of these things, especially if you got to pay for them after taxes as a contractor, rather than the way it's handled with company expenses.
Yes. Yeah.
Then that's actually less than lots of your top tier talent, at least in the United States, can make, whether working remotely or in one of the big cities. And so if somebody decided to go work for a big company with their skill set, they could definitely make more money. So here it's probably about the love of it, or maybe they live in an area with a lower cost of living, which lots of people are doing now with remote working in the pandemic.
That makes sense. I mean, I've looked into the Hacker News comments, and there's that one rule, isn't there? Never read the comments, especially if you're involved in them. And they really seem to be ripping chunks out of the guy that was getting paid a little bit more than everyone else. And even there, we can say that for the US, it's not particularly great salary when you think of all the additional costs that come into play there.
Yeah.
And I guess what they really want to do is to be able to pay the main core contributors there permanently. And as I was kind of getting the tissues out and dabbing my eyes off, I'd seen they'd raised $700,000 to date. And I don't know whether that was over, a few years or a shorter period. There's certainly a significant amount of money to raise. But it goes to show that even raising that amount of capital, once you're burning, what are they talking about, 4 salaries at $10K a month, that is a significant amount of money you need to run that team.
It is. And, one of the things that this reminds me of is the way this funding model works is different than the way lots of companies end up running things, right? Because you could justify maybe one person half time working on an open source project or a quarter time working on an open source project that's like 10 hours a week. You're contributing a lot, but the way you expense it and spend that money internally is different, right? Your engineering department may get so many people in order to do something, but then to say we're going to give this regular expense to somebody outside of our control to do work on our behalf, or we're sponsoring them, that's a different flow of money through companies. Right.
One of the other things that I guess you get also is if, let's say, your boss has at least some visibility on what you're doing, what kind of value you're creating for the company, and he would know, or he or she would know, that whilst you might do 10 hours of coding a week, you're doing 30 hours of forced multiplication because you're, a senior member of the team. That's what you do at that level. You're coaching the others. On this, I saw somebody very critically said, the top paid guy only did 10 hours worth of work in a year. And they'd done that by analyzing his Git commits. It's like, that isn't how it works, especially when it sounds like he's been spending most of his time trying to raise funding to pay everyone else a full-time salary. So it's very difficult. And I think unless you're probably running a company and aware of all the intricacies, it's difficult to be an armchair commentator here. Certainly, it seems like something we're making maybe progress on, but haven't fixed.
Have you looked at Vue.js and their funding model?
I have. If Evan, they mentioned Evan here, and I wanted to contact him. I've reached out to him so many times, but he seems too busy to speak to somebody like me. And I'd just love to pick his brains and find out how he managed to do it, because he was one of the early success stories, bringing in 10 and then 20, 30, 40, $50,000 a month. And I think they do the same thing, right? They just offer logos. Is that right?
I think it is just logos. I'm not intimately familiar with how it is. I just remember going there and seeing the sponsors and then looking into how it worked. And I just saw the logos as sponsorships. And what I found fascinated me about the project was that if you look at the top JavaScript frameworks now, you've got things like React, right? And you've got Angular or Angular 2 or whatever Angular version it's on, which is also wildly popular. It's not as much loved, but it's wildly popular. And behind those two is where Vue comes in. And so this isn't the top most widely used one. I want to say last I looked, it was in third place. And yet the amount of money in the community and the support they're getting is fantastic. And so I'd love to know how they pulled it off myself. I'd be fascinated by it. Yeah,
I would love to hear a bit more as well. Now, I guess whilst we're here, just want to say again, a thank you to everybody that's contributed to OpenVAS. This is a random selection, and as we reload the page, it shows different people there. Some of them are sponsors too. Really appreciate that. And then we have got a couple of homepage sponsors now as well, which has helping to turn things around. Waylay is an end user company, so they're putting OpenVAS into production and enterprise. They want to just support it, and that's the kind of, that was my hope in 2017, is that all of the companies would just do that, who were using it in anger, let's say. And then Linode is a more recent one as well, and we're going to start potentially doing a bit more marketing and helping them as well through the other side of the business. So, Kim.
Now, I think Kim's interesting because it's not one of the projects that we've been talking about or kind of presenting. And like at KubeCon, we had Dr. T, our CTO, up there presenting, and he had logos for all these projects, a bunch of them new ones that did shiny new things. But this one doesn't even have a logo, right? This doesn't even have a logo.
It has a typical, in your Kubernetes building your images, it seems deliberately made kind of low key.
Yeah. And so its history is there was K3C, right?
Yes.
You're familiar with K3C to let
I
you do
used
container
K3C. I
management.
raised some issues on it. I chatted with Darren about it, and it goes back to what I said at the beginning: is that the team aren't afraid to kill projects that don't feel like they're going in the right direction.
And we're not. And if you look at it, the last time this was committed to was back in January.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't even know what the contributions looked like leading up to it. But it was this idea we want to do container image building. We want to tie into the rest of the stack we use with things like, container D underneath K3S. We want to make it all work together, give you the whole experience in one set of tools. And you kind of needed that, but they didn't like the way it was functionally working. So when we started working on Rancher Desktop, right, it gives you that Kubernetes on your desktop environment. We said, well, since we're not using anybody else's stack, it doesn't require Docker to run or any of that. On Mac, we spin up our own VM. On Windows, we use WSL. We didn't need those other tools. We said, could we bundle something in that would do this? And K3C was the first thing that came to mind. Well, you're looking for...
Where are we for the desktop? Is it an experimental org?
Oh, go to rancherdesktop.io, and that's probably the easiest way to...
Oh, nice. It's got a website for it as well.
Yeah. And so, and the GitHub link's in the top right corner there. But for this, we wanted to be able to build this. And we started going with K3C, and Darren was like, well, I don't really like the way it works. I want something that works differently. So Jacob went off and created Kim, and for us to go use in this. And so we've been its first user. We've been testing it, finding issues. We've been iterating on it. It's got some other little gotchas in it we've been trying to catch, but we bundle Kim in it so we can build and use container images right inside here.
Now, my question for you is, can I use this with any K3S setup, or do I have to use K3D?
It should work with any K3S setup.
And by it, I mean Kim, I guess.
Yeah. Kim should work with any K3S setup. It does expect things to be in the places that K3S sets them up.
Right.
And so it has expectations around this. So I don't think it works in non-K3S clusters.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I originally tried. Oh, go ahead.
I think one of the things Lucas was asking, if you're still there, Lucas, was, does this work on Linux desktop? And does it even make sense there?
Well, Rancher Desktop, we have not set up for Linux. Most Linux users are really comfortable with the command line. Kim will work with K3S on a Linux desktop. Yeah, it should. If it doesn't, then file a bug because it should.
So Windows, but only with WSL, or does it work with other stuff as well?
It only uses WSL, and that's if you're on Windows Home, that's the only place you can get a Linux environment. You can't create VMs on Windows Home. And so we use WSL, which gives us that Linux environment as a baseline.
Okay. So with Windows Home, and I'm actually planning to do a bit of a stream with Nino DiCarmo or Unix. And so WSL2 will run, and that creates a VM, Microsoft say, but Windows Home can't create VMs with Hyper-V. It can create WSL2 VM.
Correct. They have, you need Windows Professional to create your own VMs, but Windows Subsystem for Linux V2 is one of the gotchas. In fact, somewhere, another part of my house, I have Surface Go. It's my little tablet that I take when I'm going somewhere and I don't want to take a full computer with me because it's so tiny. I actually have WSL V2 running Linux on it, this tiny little thing, and it works just fine in its Windows Home.
That is cool. Okay. I was actually tempted by one of those as well, and I managed to resist because I own too many computers.
I do too.
Okay, so I tried this out. Did you see my GitHub issue?
You mean about the Apple Silicon architecture?
M1.
Yeah. So one of the very first issues I filed when we were putting the backlog together for this was Apple Silicon support. We knew we needed it. It was before Docker itself had Apple Silicon support. And what we're doing first is, like you want to see whether a project is going to make it. I think at KubeCon, when Dr. T did his keynote, there were like 5 or 6 new open source projects out of SUSE that he shared on the slide. If you look at the logo, things that did not exist at the start of 2021 that weren't public or out there. And when you look at these, we don't expect them all to make it. We don't know which ones are going to survive. And so when we put Rancher Desktop out there, we said, all right, this is the hardware we have. We'll build for Windows on Intel and Apple on Intel. It's the hardware we work on. And if it succeeds, if people like it, if they want us to continue this, then we can justify ordering some new hardware and building out those things. But we actually wanted to test the waters first. See if a project
sounds like a good kind of leverage to have on yourselves, is that you will get Apple M1s if you can get some traction on this project.
I hadn't looked at it that way, but yeah.
Someone has, I think. Someone on your team will be looking at it that way, maybe Jacob. Okay.
Yeah.
So I know we've got pretty technical people on the call, and I don't want to leave them waiting much longer. So what I'm going to do is, I could probably do it all in one place. If I put this on, and then just check that it worked. It did. I mean, make it a bit bigger.
Yeah.
Always hard to know how big isn't big enough. This is Arcade. Arcade does 2 things. It can basically get and install an app, so a Helm chart, or use static manifests, or it can use CLIs that come with projects. So if you think about Linkerd, if you've ever used that, the main way to install it is through their CLI. So this tool downloads the CLI, runs it, tells you how to use it. If you want a Kubernetes dashboard, again, it just applies YAML. If you want OpenFAS, it gets the Helm chart, adds it, updates it, and automates everything for you. Now, what I was doing was I was encoding the rules that helped me get the various versions down. And it looked like do I have a bug in my code? That'd be annoying. So let's try it out and see if I can get Kim anyway. So make a build of Arcade. Arcade get Kim. What's happening? So I've messed up that URL. Does that look? It looks like I'm missing the version on it. Should be Linux AMD. It should look like that. So maybe we'll save that for another time and just download it the normal way. So let's get Kim. Now, if this references containerd, I imagine it's one of the bigger ones, is it? As a download. 47 megs. So you may want to consider tarring that up and zipping it, because that's there's at least one team that's doing that. So I think it was build packs do it. Inlats is doing it, and then some people do zip. So Helm is a zip because again, it's referencing the Kubernetes API. It's pretty big. So there's a little bit feedback. Take that. Free advice.
No. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll pass it on to Jacob about it. In fact, we've probably got a couple other tools I could use it to. I think Hipper, which is another one of our projects, is also just sending out the binaries.
What's the other one? Sorry.
Hipper is also one. I think we're just shipping the binary for that.
I don't know Hipper.
Oh, let's do Kim and then we'll touch on Hipper.
It's Hipper. It's not to do with compliance, is it? With payment laws?
No, Hipper has to do with package management. It's built on Helm. No, not HIPAA. HYPPER.
Okay.
Hipper, and it's package management like Helm, but for cluster admins.
Interesting. I wonder if there's any overlap with Arcade. Now, what I want to do is I want to move Kim somewhere later. And so here we are. I've got my binary. I find it so useful to have the versions in these tools. I mean, this is obviously so alpha right now, but you've still got the version in, and I appreciate that. And with new tools I've gone off and created, number one thing is just get the version in. It's just so helpful. Now, on my context, that's the kind that I've got something running in that I want. So if I k3 the create and the syntax was changed on that, so it doesn't match with kind anymore, and so it's something that I always get wrong. I have to type it in again every time. Right, so we should be good to go. And what do I want with Kim? I've got my cluster.
So with Kim, there is both a client side, which is the binary, and a server side that runs inside of the cluster. And so one of those times when you go to run something, it'll automatically do it. But say you did something like a Kim builder. The builder is what runs in the cluster. Builder, you can see the different commands to install it, because the builder image has to be running in order, because the building and the storage and everything actually happens inside your Kubernetes cluster.
Okay.
And
so if I install that will install my agent.
It installs your agent. But if you don't have the agent installed, when you go to run one of the other commands, it'll detect the agent's not there and try to install it for you.
Okay.
So even if it's not there, it tries to make that simple for you.
Now, whilst we're waiting, I'm going to do an arcade install OpenFAS into the same cluster. And if we have the time, we can see if we can sort of get the OpenFAS function built and pushed in.
That'd be great.
Okay. Now, Lucas looked at the Kim syntax, and we had almost everything we needed, other than -- squash seemed to be missing. I don't know if you're aware of that one. And I assume BuildKit supports squash.
Yeah, and so it was just started with the basics, right? It's a 0.1.0.alpha. If you want squash, that's the perfect thing to file a feature request on, because these are the kinds of things, if somebody uses it and they discover a gap, then we can, and I can either file the issue or you can. It's up to you.
Well, let's see. Are you still on there, Lucas? Drop us a comment if you're still on. Now, how long should we be waiting for this daemon availability? Do you think might be a problem after this long?
You might want to go see what's going on in the cluster. And
timeout.
It timed out. Ooh, interesting. I haven't tried it with K3D. Can you take a look at all the pods you've got running in the cluster? Let's see if the pod's there for the builder.
I have a doc. I've got a Docker PS. I could look at that one, or as you say, these are my actual pods.
And so you see the builder down at the bottom, error creating container. We might want to look at the logs real quick.
Has it got a deployment? No, it's just a pod, is it?
It might be a daemon set. I can't remember. It was.
Yeah, probably a daemon set.
The pod name is builder. Yeah.
Okay, and then we've got a few. Oh, we've got a lot in there. Okay, we've got build kit, waiting to start agent, create error. And we've got init containers.
Yeah.
Temp isn't invalid mount point. Valid mount point. Tell you what, should we just create it with K3S somewhere and then go into that?
We could do that.
Okay, so let me get a VM. Any particular OS that we need for this?
It shouldn't matter.
Shouldn't matter. Okay. Now, have we heard back from Lucas? No. Okay, so you might have had to go. I'm going to go and put my other screen on quickly. So, as I said earlier, Linode kindly sponsored the OpenFAS homepage. Give me some credits to play with. I always like free credits, as long as it's a reliable system. That's all that really interests me. That's why I have so many Intel NUCs and Raspberry Pis. I don't like paying for cloud stuff. I like to just be able to set it up and go and not worry about it. I need a root password. Okay. Interesting. I'll do. Better delete that later. And then I get to show you ketchup now. That's a bonus. So as long as I've got my SSH key on it, once that's set up, we'll go back to our, okay. So that's where we're going. This is how it works, is with the copy ID command. That should have it on already. That's still provisioning. What kind of cloud platforms are you using when you're testing stuff out? I remember Darren was really sort of fond of AWS at the time.
Yeah, we'll probably use AWS or Azure a lot. They're the two most popular cloud platforms anyway. So we should be testing stuff out where our end users are doing it, and those tend to be the two most popular. But a lot of this stuff will run anywhere. These days, I do a lot of it on my desktop when I'm playing around with it, or a computer that I have in my home. It's quite frankly, network being a limiting factor. It's a lot faster to play with stuff right in my own home.
Absolutely, similar here. Plus all that cost. I still can't shirk that developer mentality of, I'm running something I could run at home, and it's pretty much could be almost as good. What I do like is when I have to build a big Docker image, let's say a few gigs, and my internet connection is only 100 megabit down, like 8 up. If I can log in at Equinix Metal again, there's another cloud where I have some credit. Got like a 10 gigabit pipe. It's like ridiculously faster than me doing it on my own machine.
Yes, right. Yes, it is.
So, ketchup install, user and IP. That tends to be all that we need here. And then we can also pass in like other flags if you want them, like specific K3S version. There's also a channel. We could just do, I think latest channel would be fine.
Sure.
Okay. And one of the things you can do with ketchup is just like with K3D, it saves it and configures it in your kube config. You can do it here, and I can merge this in, give it a special context. I don't know, Linode K3S. But by default, what it will do is just pop that into a file in the current working directory. Mainly because, like you, a lot of the time I'm just testing. So now if I just put this in, we can get our nodes. And if the kubelet's all up and running, it should be ready soon. Ready. Okay. Now we've got K3S.
That was nice and fast.
Yeah. So hopefully we converted you over. Now, and remember, this is all running on my computer, right? So that's the whole point, is that we shouldn't have to log in and change the IP or paths. Do this again. Right, and now I can run that KIM that I've got on my local machine. I'm pointing at the kube context, and then we can do builder, install again. One of the other things that you can do is also give it a context name. I think that's just been called localhost because probably was the context that it saved, or the host name. Hopefully we'll have a bit more luck with this.
Yeah, I hope so. Although I think I'm running the one version older of KIM. I don't think I've got the latest.
Well, we can always pull back a slightly older one if we need to.
Yeah, I'm running Alpha 11, and that's what I didn't even realize Alpha 12 was out yet.
So I'm just asking the chat, any questions for Matt or myself? It's gone a bit quiet, but we've actually got more people tuned in than we had earlier.
Okay.
So they must be enjoying it. Oh, and this time we didn't get the error.
Yeah. And there's the builder. Good. It's running.
We're going. Okay.
And so now if you ran a command like kim images, you'd actually see, here's the images that your cluster currently has inside a container D.
Yeah, and if I was logged in on the box and I ran the CTR command, I would get similar as well, right? Now, let's go back in that directory because this is the IP I want. Do we have CTR? Yes. So as I understand it, this is what we're reading back, is we're reaching into container D, we're looking at the snapshots, looking at the images, and it's effectively printing very similar data to what we've got there.
Yes, yes.
And that's a great thing that I like, I really like that about K3S, is that there's that decision to use K3D. We have a project, a version of OpenVAS that in the similar vein only runs with container D. It's not clustered, it's not networked beyond the bridge. And we do a similar thing. We just poke directly in to pull images and deploy stuff. So working with container D can be a bit confusing. There's not a lot of documentation, but we're doing pretty well with it now. Okay, so I could pull an image.
Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the things that I should warn you about with Kim, though, is it works best right now when you just have a single node. The ability to replicate across all of the container Ds running on each of the nodes, right? We're early alpha. We haven't done that because the primary user has been Rancher Desktop, which is a single node environment right now.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's just one of those things to warn you about. But it is one of those things that if there's interest, people are curious about. It's one of those things that can be added. We just haven't done the work yet. So
let's see if I was to go and create a function, and this pulls down our templates out of Git.
Yep.
And then I've got it there. So if I look in my tester YAML, this is the name that I would get. Now, because we can't, one thing we could do is potentially alias Kim build to Docker build, and that might just work. But fast CLI build actually invokes Docker build. You see the command?
Mm-hmm.
We see the output. We don't print the command anymore. So there's two ways we could do that. We could alias Docker to Kim and what have you. But there's also one other thing here, which is shrink wrap. And shrink wrap, if you maybe guess what it does, it outputs a context for Docker file. Because normally the function, as you may not know, is just the handler. Docker file and everything else, a bit like a cloud native build pack, isn't really your concern. You just write your code. So the shrink wrap just blows it all out into one folder, and then we can effectively CD into that, and we can do a Kim build here. Now, is that how we want it?
Kim build, your tag name.
I can see some build kit. I like build kit. And so this is connecting from the client to the agent. The agent is now streaming the studio out of build kit, I imagine.
Yep.
And it's exporting the layers.
And now this image, if you did, so the layers and everything is now available. So if you ran Kim images to see what was available inside of your cluster, you should now see this here.
I just want to check it didn't push it to the Docker Hub, given that it named it as Docker IO, and it didn't.
It didn't push it. It didn't push it. It just made it available. So if you ran Kim images, you'll see it. It's available inside of your cluster. You can go use it right now, but it hasn't automatically been pushed.
Let's do that. Let's see if it works without any changes.
In fact, this is one of those things that I like, is that it is available without me having to push and pull it. So if I'm iterating on something, if I'm playing around with it and I don't want to push it yet, I can use it right here.
Right. So I'm getting OpenVAS in. Now, I did ask people if they had any questions. Just see. No. Okay, not yet. So one of the other things with OpenVAS and Arcade or Arcade and any of the apps is Arcade Info will tell you what install command you forgot, whereas Helm won't. Right? You can't, unless you install it again, which I used to do until I developed Arcade with help from the community. So we're rolled out. We now get our port forward just because that works everywhere. We used to have, node ports and stuff. But again, that isn't really as intuitive. Okay, so list. We're listing. We've got our tester YAML file. So let's deploy it. Guess, do I need to do if not present as a pull policy? Will this work if it's set to pull policy always?
It should, because always should always pull it. That may not work because always pulls. Let's find out.
So that's taking a bit too long for me.
Yeah, it may require if not present.
And I think we may even have if not present set. Okay, error pull back off, pulling from Docker Hub.
So it couldn't pull the image. Yeah, because it's always trying to.
Let's see if we can edit the deployment and pull policy. Is set to always. Okay. Yeah. So this might be the patch. I mean, and this is something you can put in through Arcade again, is you can install and do -- set, or in some of these flags we've made them strongly typed. Okay, let's get our events again. Created, it's already present. Scaled down the old one. Okay. And this is an echo function, so that is doing what it was meant to. So how quickly can we edit our code? Kim is cool. How quickly can we get that done? So we want to shrink wrap it. Go into the folder. Kim build it. I guess we could use the same tag.
I think so.
We'll find out. We'll find out. And now go back up a level, deploy this. Okay. Now, how quickly are we going to get it? Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Nice.
Nice.
Now,
and then if you wanted to push it, you would have to use the Kim push command, because Kim push and pull are the ones for that.
Does it have my auth, or do I have to figure that one out separately?
I'll be honest, I've just been doing local development. I don't remember where it's at. When I first started, I don't think any of that worked. And Jacob and I had talked about it, but I have not looked at it.
Let's see what happens.
That's a real good question. Because I'm always pulling upstream things. I haven't tried to push anything in a while.
So my daemon is probably configured with the secret already, because I pay for the Docker Hub to avoid getting rate limited. So $60 a year. And it worked. But now, if I had a pull policy of always, it would be getting this dirty image instead of the one that we want. So I'd probably now, if I was an OpenVAS user, I'd update the tag, or I'd maybe generate a new tag every time I build.
Yeah.
So let me think about this. If we witch Docker and we do a quick NV of that, right? Let's call it Docker 2. Right, we've now got no Docker. Alias Kim equals Docker. Is that right? No, I've done that the wrong way. Alias Docker equals Kim.
That's right.
Possibly need $1, $2, etc. off the end of that. Don't know. It's not quite working.
No, it's not picking up the...
I think you need to do like this kind of thing, and then maybe even another way of expressing it. Okay, So I don't know how to do bash aliases, it seems. But
Yeah,
what I
I'm
do is an ln.
There you go.
And then I need my alias.
Yeah, I know my alias. I'm a CSH user. My alias there is just one command to another.
Okay, so now I've got something called Docker, which is actually Kim. Let's see if I can do fast CLI up. And we have to skip our push in this instance. And we just do one more edit. And just go, thanks for watching. Let's see, what do we get? 2.7 seconds. That's, if this has worked, that is so much faster than the alternative. Despite all the constraints, obviously, and it being beta and one thing and another. Wow. So that was fast. What do you think?
That was fast. And you know, that's just one of the advantages, I think, with it pushing right into the environment. It's great for development at this point.
So I'm wondering where everyone is. I can see everybody watching. No one's chatting. So I know some of you have used OpenFast, fast CLI up. Normally what would happen is we'd be building, pushing. Once it's deployed, it will be getting pulled back again. And we just cut that loop out completely without really sacrificing much. So I think this would make a really cool blog post, actually, which we should have a chat about at another time.
Yeah.
So very quickly, what is the other tool we were going to look at?
Oh, Hyper. If you want to pull it up, it's hypper.io, hypper.io.
So is it in the Rancher GitHub org?
No, it's in the Rancher Sandbox org. Hypper.io has a link to it. I tend to use the websites because I always get the links.
Let me put a link to that in the chat as well.
Yeah, and so there's Hyper. You can see a bunch of the stuff right there in the middle. Hyper, you see some of the things that we're working on. Some of them are in other places. That's the yeah. And so you'll notice the common design that we have for all the project sites now. They look a lot like the K3S site. Yeah, and so they've got different logos, they've got different color schemes, but they're all centralized on design. Yay, marketing doing this. And what Hyper is it does dependencies a little bit differently than Helm. It's all built on charts, and it really targets cluster admins. And so it uses the Helm SDK under the hood, and it's got a CLI and SDK of its own, but it does things a little different. For example, in a chart, you can declare a namespace and a release name that are installed, and every time you do it, it tries to install it into those same locations, right? Because a normal Helm user, you could have multi-tenants in a cluster. You could install it more than once into a namespace or different namespaces. Here, we assume you're installing it just once per cluster for things like system services. And so you can install something right out of the box, and it knows where to put it because it's a well-known location in a cluster. A system service, monitoring, logging, things like that, you're always going to install in the same place. And then you can couple things together because it does things like shared dependencies. So you can have two things that depend on a third, and it installs each of them as their own release. And
maybe
it knows where to
through the quick start then. So we got the binary.
Yep.
What are we doing here?
Oh, here, I guess we're using Bitnami as the example. We probably got to clean this up. But here we're just adding a Helm repo. And we have a repository now that's an example of the Rancher charts. It's a Hyper example. Yep. And so you can add that repository. And
I guess we can't browse that.
You can't browse it.
Actually, yeah. Okay, got it.
Yep.
But I did see it in here. Everything's going wrong. So at the bottom of here, we had the charts.
Yep.
And what's in here? Just your
That's
own.
the source of the charts. That's the source.
What about our charts? What about the OpenVAS chart?
I don't know. I don't think it's in here. So these are the charts that are the core ones that go into Rancher. They are not the partner ones or those things. It's just the core charts that Rancher we put out. And in here we have, in our charts, we're going to have annotations. And the annotations tell us a bunch of different things.
This is a normal chart YAML, isn't it? And then you've got the annotations for metadata.
Yep. And annotations is part of the normal chart YAML schema where you can add your own stuff. And here you'll see we have a release name and a namespace, and they're namespaced with hipper.kettle.io. And we've got fleet system and fleet. And that tells Hipper where to install it. Install it with the release name of fleet into the fleet system namespace. And so if you've got multiple things that rely on something, it'll go check if it's installed. And where Helm packages them all up into one deploy that it puts up all at the same time with its dependencies, Hipper will go in and install the dependencies first and then go and install your main package. So it makes sure your dependencies up, and the chart templates are sandboxed separately. They're installed with separate releases, and it's designed for system services because we're really targeting cluster admins.
Would that be something like if we go back to the quick start example, then we are putting in the database MariaDB, and then what? Is there something dependent upon it here, like WordPress?
Here there isn't. We probably need to clean up our quick start. You putting it up here reminds me that it's out of date.
Is that what you're kind of going for? Is there an example? Maybe there's an example here we can see our app.
Yeah. So here's one. You've got backup and backup CRD. Yeah. Backup should depend on backup CRD.
Okay, let's take a look.
Oh, there it does. I didn't actually write this. Does it depend? No, it doesn't. Okay. It looks like we got to clean up our, what you're telling me is we have to clean up our examples here. And so I'll own that and I'll go take it. But the idea is you can have the CRD as a dependency. In fact, if you go back to our docs.
I want to see if there is a CRD in here. Is resource set a convention, calling it that?
A resource set?
Yeah.
That is something that that's a convention that Rancher uses around our stuff. That's cool. That's just a naming pattern we
rather than CRD YAML. It's just okay. Yeah, I see. So having CRD in a chart can be useful for versioning as well. I think one of the things probably would be useful is when we get to it is namespaced CRDs. We often get people asking about that with OpenVAS. You know, can we get the CRD installed only in our namespace because we are not cluster admin and we have to raise a ticket to get access? I don't know if you hear that as well.
Yeah, I do. And you know, I went back to the original write-up. So after CRDs were being written up, and you know, that's the new name. If you go back to the original pull request to document, and I think the pull request was closed on Kubernetes and never got merged, that documented the case for CRDs. And I think the closest thing I could think of is it was like a kernel extension. You're literally extending the API for Kubernetes. And when you go to do that, that's kind of a cluster admin. You don't really want to permission-wise give everybody in the cluster the ability from a security standpoint to add new API endpoints, right?
No.
You're going to want to control that. And since it was kind of like a kernel extension to Kubernetes, that's where this, you know, all spurred out from. And we've now gone and we use them in our applications. We use them in all these places, far beyond that. And that's where we kind of butt heads, because convenience and security and configurability kind of butt heads here. And I don't know that the Kubernetes community that we have a good answer yet. So here's an example.
I found one.
Yep, shared dependencies. And you can, what it'll do here, Hipper, if you go to install this chart, will go ahead and say, oh, I've got some dependencies. Is fleet installed? And it knows the fleet chart is supposed to be in that fleet namespace you looked at before with that name. And so it goes to see, is it installed? If it is, it'll tell you it's already installed. They don't have to do anything. If it's not installed, it'll install it as its own Helm release. So if you ran Helm LS to see all the releases, you'd see
But
it there.
into which namespace? Because we've got all of that configuration here saying, oh, this is exactly how it needs to be. But how are you specifying that? Surely that should be duplicated in line here as well.
Since fleet here should be a singleton in the cluster, it looks in the fleet chart to see what namespace was declared inside of that chart. Where is that supposed to be always? So that way you could have system services all in their own namespaces with their own releases, and they can discover each other in the separate namespaces.
Okay. This is starting to have a twang of Juju about it. I don't know if you've ever come close to Mark Shuttleworth's sort of pet project, Juju.
I had forgotten all about Juju. It was not an inspiration for any of this. This was all inspired by Darren, actually. He said, hey, we do a lot of this in Rancher today, but there's a bunch of lessons we've learned, and so I'd want to do things differently. And so it's a little bit different than what Rancher does today. And he wanted to pull the logic out because a lot of it's in the GUI layer for Rancher in the dashboard. And it's like, this should be separate from it. And other people may benefit from it too. And so that's what happened here. So Juju was not an inspiration, but it's funny you bring that up.
Well, I wonder if it was something that Darren was aware of, because he has his hands in a lot of pies, knows a lot of different things. But yeah, they're sort of trying to reboot it and make it relevant for Kubernetes. And one of the things they really care about, because I did a commercial project with them and helped them out with some ideas, was you could install WordPress and it could declare that it needs MariaDB or Postgres. And then once it was installed, it could emit an event. If they existed in the cluster, they could publish their address and they could bind themselves together and start serving requests. And I thought that one idea out of everything was probably the most valuable, most interesting. Maybe that's kind of an element of that here.
Yeah, and in this case, think about something like logging or monitoring. Like if you're going to install Prometheus, you probably only want one of those in the cluster for all your services to use. And so if you go to install a system service and it's depending on logging and monitoring, you install the first one, it should install those. And when you go to install the second system service, it should say, hey, they're already here. I don't have to do anything. They're already there. And so those kinds of situations are what spawned this. And because Helm deals a lot more with application operation, and this is more cluster admin, that's why we've kind of done it as a separate tool. But we built on top of Helm because that's what Rancher has long done.
I get it. Okay. Well, that's great. I think we should wrap it up there because we've gone over a little bit on time, and folks will start dropping off for their dinner. It's 6 o'clock in the UK. Where is it? Where you are?
It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
1 o'clock in the afternoon. Where
I'm Eastern US time zone.
Why did I think you're in Pacific? I always seem to bump into people that are in Pacific and then find a few people in Eastern, and you get so much more overlap with them. It's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so what should we be looking out for on Rancher Desktop or Kim or anything else that you're working on?
We're going to continue to add features to these. So some of them you'll see that we launched these things and they're pretty early and rough, which gives people an opportunity to try them out, to give us feedback, to tell us what they like, what they don't like, what works, what doesn't. And we can kind of shape these as we head towards 1.0s or maybe our MVP feature set based on what works or it doesn't. So if you all take it for a spin and let us know, that's great. We also have 4 or 5 other projects that came out, and we have some more coming, some that I think you'll especially like when they see the light of day.
Cool.
So look out for more projects because we have been on an innovation R&D just going gangbusters lately, and there's just so many projects coming out.
Yeah. Send them over to me. I'll put them in my sponsors email. Let people know about them. I've put your Twitter on here at Matt Farina. Where are you hoping to get this feedback? I know SUSE launched a new community. Are you part of that yet? Have you joined it?
I've joined it. I've posted there a few times, a couple of articles on there, but I still think the best place for any open source project is give the feedback right in the issue queue. right? Just go to the issue queue, file a bug, file a feature report, ask about something. Most of the projects we have, we try to be pretty reactive to what comes into the issue queue. The other place is there's the Rancher user Slack, and the projects all have rooms in Rancher user Slack where you can come try to get us right away. I would suggest pinging us directly if you want to get us right away, because
there's no kind of deprecation of the Slack for the SUSE community. It's still going to stay around, as far as you know.
As far as I know, it's going to stay around until it doesn't. It's above my pay grade. It's around until it's not.
I get it. Yeah, I mean, Slack, I do like the new system they put together. It does look really cool. All right. I really appreciate you making time at short notice. Last week was pretty intense. And do send those across. Anybody that's still listening, or if you're watching this later on. Kim, look great. I'm going to be watching it closely. And, Matt, just thanks for giving the time. Appreciate it. And carry on doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. This is great.
All right. Okay.
All right.
Right. Well, bye, everybody. Thanks for being here. We're going to play our exit music now. And you can also get hold of me on Twitter too. All right. Bye-bye.